Okay, we are live. Welcome to Boston Basic Income. I'm Alex Howlett. This week we're discussing Chapter 2 of Basic Income, a radical proposal for a free society and a sane economy. So the title of Chapter 2 is Basic Income and Its Cousins. And the book is by Philippe van Parijs and Yannick Vanderborght. So this chapter compares basic income to several alternative policies. We will explore how basic income stacks up against a basic endowment, also known as the stakeholder grant, negative income tax, earned income tax credit, wage subsidies, guaranteed employment, also known as a job guarantee, and working time reduction. If we wanted to, we could call the topic for today basic income purity tests. If a policy isn't a pure basic income, to what extent does it belong in the same conversation? So we'll read what the authors have to say, or some of their comments about these policies, and then we'll form our own opinions. So here's an excerpt that introduces the chapter. For many of our readers, this chapter is unnecessary, but for some, at least one section of it is absolutely essential. They are the readers who found the diagnosis of the previous chapter compelling enough, but could easily think and kept thinking while reading of one or more far better solutions than the one we propose. In this chapter, we briefly present and discuss the main alternatives to an unconditional basic income. So this is, I think, an important question to ask right at the beginning is, what is basic income a solution to? So in the previous chapter, the authors argue that basic income helps foster a free society and a sane economy. That's not wrong per se, but it's also a little bit vague. And I don't think it gets to the root of what basic income is, or kind of the fundamental problem that it solves. So as we explore these alternatives, we can evaluate them through the lens of freedom, which is kind of the lens that they're taking. But we can also evaluate them through the lens of, ensuring an efficient mechanism for providing money to consumers. So the first alternative that they explore is called a basic endowment, which is also known as a stakeholder grant. So this is a lump sum payment as compared to a basic income, which is a regular income that you get periodically. You get it all at once when you reach adulthood. And this is the idea that Thomas Paine put forward in his pamphlet, Agrarian Justice. So he also wanted to combine it with pension benefits for retired people. But he wasn't really a basic income supporter. He was more of a basic endowment supporter or a stakeholder grants supporter. So that's important to keep in mind anytime you hear a basic income supporter, kind of talking about how Thomas Paine supported basic income or something like that. Well, sort of. It depends on how wide you want to cast your net in including things as basic income. So let's go to this quote here. Basic income and basic endowment have much in common. Both are paid in cash on an individual basis without means test or work test. Moreover, a basic endowment could easily be converted into a basic income. It would only need be invested in such a way as to generate an actuarially equivalent annuity up to the recipient's death, thus generating a regular flow of income. Conversely, if a basic income could be mortgaged, as a concern for freedom would seem to recommend, it would provide an equivalent endowment. So depending on what your access is to financial instruments, you could turn one into the other, no problem. Well, you could turn one into the other. I think there are some frictions, and they actually get into some of those frictions in the chapter. But first, I want to ask, again, coming back to the question of what problem basic income solves, is it to give everyone maximum freedom, including the freedom to, waste all your money up front and screw yourself over? If so, then basic endowments feel like they might be a better choice than basic income. Sometimes I hear people argue for basic income on the grounds that individuals should be entrusted to spend money in their own best interest or something like that. I think sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not true. The point of basic income is that once you've already decided that you need a mechanism for distributing money, you have an efficient way of doing it, right? So we can talk about basic income independent of these concerns about, whether, people are going to spend their money wisely or something or like that. The question is, you need a way to get people money. Is it going to be basic income or is it going to be something else? So kind of all of this is to say that I find the individual people know what's best for them argument to be somewhat silly as an argument for basic income. It's more that basic income is appropriate when the market is appropriate as your distribution mechanism. So it's appropriate under the circumstances where it happens to be true that individual people do know what's best for them, or will act in their own best interest, given the money and buying things in the market. So the basic endowment, you could imagine implementing it and kind of hypothetically, another issue they bring up in the book is that some people have different access to investment resources. But you could imagine that some people just blow it. Does that mean that, okay, you blew all your money at 21 and now you're done? That doesn't really make any sense. And it doesn't make sense from a welfare, like taking care of people standpoint. And it doesn't make sense really from an efficiency standpoint either. I mean, ultimately the economy is about taking care of the people. So you want them to have kind of consistent access to the benefit that the economy provides. So there is a bit of paternalism in here saying, oh, we really don't want you to, waste your entire, sum of money that the government gives you right when you turn 21. But that's, basic income isn't anti-paternalism. It says when you want to get people money, how do we do that? And then for other things, we need, the government to provide certain infrastructure and certain resources in a way that's independent of people's individual decisions. So there's both. There's always going to be both. Basic income funds the market. Bethany, do you have a comment?
No, is my hand raised? Because Annabelle had the keyboard.
Oh, you briefly unmuted. It must have been Annabelle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to bring up another quote here. Lifetime opportunities are determined only to a very limited extent by the endowment received at 21. They are powerfully affected by intellectual abilities, parental attention, school quality, social networks, and many other factors. On average, those young people who are already favored along these various dimensions are precisely those who are most likely to make the best possible use of their endowment. The real possibilities associated with the same nominal amount will therefore be considerably less for those who lack the intelligence, guidance, education, and connections that would enable them at the beginning of their adult lives to completely competently select in light of what they care about upon reflection, what is best for themselves. So in a sense, this is, you're protecting your older, more mature self from the rash decisions of your younger self by not giving your younger self all the money up front. So that's kind of part of what they're arguing here. And then just different people's circumstances give them different opportunities. Of course, in order for the basic endowment to be functionally different from the basic income, you need to restrict what kind of finance people have access to. Because if you can, go to the bank and say, hey, I'm going to have this basic income for the next 60 years. I'll promise to pay you that when it comes in. What can I get now? What can I borrow now? Right? You need to have something in place to prevent that. And that's surprisingly hard to do. If people have promised cash flows in the future, that's always something you can kind of leverage. And we do want people to be able to leverage that for the purpose of security, but not for the purpose of blowing it all. So that's a tricky thing to do. But I think you probably want to start from a perspective of, okay, we want people to have consistent access to the economy over time, and then it's up to them, if they really want to borrow against those future cash flows. We'll try to protect them from that, but it's at least you're starting from a place that's closer to what you want functionally, rather than giving people all the money up front, which is closer to allowing people to just spend it all away. So that is the basic endowments. The next one on the list is the negative income tax. So let me share a quote about that. So negative income tax, for those who aren't familiar, is a basic, it's essentially like a basic income paired with an income tax. So you're implementing a basic income, and you're also implementing an income tax at the same time. And then at the end of the day, those payments, the taxes you owe and the basic income that you are owed by the government, they net that out. So you only pay if on net you owe, and you only receive if on net you are owed money by the government. So let's get this one up. It is often asserted, including by Friedman himself, this is Milton Friedman, who's an advocate of negative income tax, that a basic income funded by personal income taxation and a negative income tax are equivalent. This is basically what I just said. Moreover, many of the arguments used to favor basic income as opposed to means-tested minimum income schemes are also used in favor of negative income tax proposals. So I just want to say that, a basic income on its own is not negative income tax. The basic income on its own is just giving everybody money. It's not paired with any particular tax. It's everyone gets money equally. You start to pair it with an income tax, and it starts to look more like a negative income tax. So a negative income tax, at least, in terms of kind of the math, how the math works out, can be made distributionally equivalent to a basic income paired with an income tax. If the income tax is applied at the individual level, so you're not taxing households. Right now we tax households for income tax. And if there's no work requirement, so you have to meet all these other requirements as well. I suppose if you had a basic income paired with an income tax that was taxed at the level of the household, you could structure a negative income tax that kind of factored all of that in. You would need to make sure that one of the key things about basic income is that it's on an individual basis. It's not on the household basis. So I don't know if it really how you could really net out payments that go to individual members of a household with, taxes that the whole household has to pay or something like that. But you could probably fudge something together. In any event, the negative income tax, it feels more like something we already do. We already have a taxation system, and people pay their taxes at the end of the year, and it feels like something you just change the parameters of the existing system, and it would work. Whereas basic income is something new that's not really like anything that we're doing now. Maybe it's closest to Social Security or something like that, but it's still not the same thing. So I think another issue is, you wouldn't want people to have to wait till the end of the year to receive their money back from the government. If you want to make it equivalent to a basic income, you'd want to have it come at regular intervals, monthly or weekly, or even more frequently than that. So it's there are these problems where even if you have a negative income tax that gives you the same amount of money as a basic income, people might not spend in the same way if the money isn't coming in frequently enough. It might just be an end of year thing, and you don't want that for kind of an inefficient distribution of money. And then we can get into a debate about whether income tax is a good idea at all in the first place. But if you like income tax and you like basic income, I think the most efficient thing you can do is probably to keep them separate, because then the payments, the benefit payments, are very simple. You just have to pay them out to everyone. All the logistics are still going to be on the taxation side, and that gets messed up sometimes. It's never perfect, but it's okay if that's not perfect. It's not really okay if you don't give people their basic income. So I think it makes sense to keep these separate. So let's go to another quote here. So this is about the Nixon Plan. The most famous among the proposals often granted this label, negative income tax, is President Nixon's Family Assistance Plan, to which we will return in Chapter 4. It granted transfers to able-bodied adults only provided they were willing to work. If the refundable tax credit is not obligation free, then obviously no equivalence can be claimed with basic income. So I think this is an important point too. And it's interesting, with the Thomas Paine basic endowment, basic income supporters, kind of politically, they claim him, right, as a basic income supporter. And they tend to claim the Nixon Family Assistance Plan as a form of basic income as well, even though it's really not. It's more of a negative income tax that is not equivalent to a basic income because it's got these other conditions attached to it. So it's important to pay attention to what people are really talking about. I think another example is Martin Luther King. He didn't really support basic income. He supported what he called a guaranteed annual income, which some of it could come in the form of just cash transfer payments from the government. But he was also okay with it coming in the form of jobs, as long as people's income was high enough to kind of meet some kind of poverty standard or something like that. So I wouldn't say that Martin Luther King supported a basic income either. And this is, like I said, this discussion is a little bit of a kind of a basic income purity test. But I think basic income is a really important and very simple concept, simple and important concept in itself. Because it solves this very simple problem, which is how to get money to consumers. And if you don't have, if you try to attach all these other things to it, then it can start to get really complicated really quickly. So let's go to, or actually I need to do. Okay. This is a long one. That's a very long one. I hope you guys can see that. It is important, however, also to pay attention to the second feature, universality as such, or the fact that basic income is paid upfront at the same level to all. So this is kind of what I was talking about, irrespective of income from other sources. At first sight, this is just a secondary administrative difference that should count in favor of a negative income scheme. To reach the same final result, the latter avoids a wasteful back and forth between taxpayers and the government. So they're saying, with basic income, you have to give people money and then tax it back again. And that seems excessive or wasteful. And we read an article in here by Daron Azamoglu, who made that exact argument. Like, why are you giving people money only to tax it back again? Basic income is a terrible idea. But the thing is that poor people can't wait until the end of the tax year before receiving the transfer that will enable them not to starve. And it is therefore self-evident that a negative income tax scheme must include a procedure of advanced payments. All those who expect to have an income lower than the break-even point, not only the subset of those who expect to earn a gross income lower than the guaranteed minimum, must have access to this procedure. In an era of electronic benefit delivery and pay-as-you-go taxation, the administrative cost of the information and control aspects of this additional procedure required by a negative income tax scheme would easily outweigh the administrative cost of the back and forth required by a basic income scheme. And at the same time, for familiar reasons of complication and stigmatization, the rate of take-up among beneficiaries would remain well below what can easily be achieved by a universal scheme. So, and I think it's important to point out that some people just don't have the resources to navigate the bureaucracy, to navigate the system. If we want a money distribution system that works, we can't condition it on people's incomes. The people who have the least incomes, the lowest incomes, are the ones who are least equipped to navigate the system. So basic income keeps the logistics of income calculation and taxation separate from the money distribution mechanism. So now we're going to move on to so Joan in the chat says the endowment would make sense if you want to make a big investment, e.g. buy a house. Yeah, that's true. And then the question is, if you want to buy a house, are you going to be able to borrow against your future basic income cash flows? I think there's reasons why people would want a lump sum. There's reasons why, when people win the lottery, they choose the lump sum sometimes, even though it's a lot less than the annual payment. Yeah, that's true. The question is whether it's better for people on net and whether. Yeah, I mean, what you want is a smooth functioning economy that people generally have access to. If you give one person an endowment, maybe that person buys a house. If you give everyone an endowment, maybe that kind of drives up the price of houses or something all at once. Or I guess it wouldn't be all at once because people would be turning 21, kind of regularly. That would be pretty smooth. But yeah, it's the question remains, what do you do if, that person's investment tanks and they lose everything? You don't want to leave people hanging, and you want people to have constant access. So I think there are ways to provide, financial assistance to people who want to make big investments, or that kind of thing. Basic income solves a different problem. It solves the problem of what's the normal way that people get their money, right? So it solves the problem that we kind of use jobs to solve. We expect people to get their regular income from wages. So it's the analogy would be, you hire someone to work at a job for 10 years and you pay them all of the money up front, right? So you make $100,000 a year. Okay, we'll pay you $1 million on your hire date, and then you get no money after that. That's kind of the analogy between the basic endowment and the basic income. So it's just it's solving a different problem, right? It's just what's the normal way, the normal kind of cash inflow that people get, and then there's other things we can do to solve these other problems. Maybe a basic endowment is useful for something, and you'd want to have that on top of the basic income and make the basic income a little bit smaller. Maybe when people are reaching adulthood, that's a time when they really need resources to get off the ground or something like that, or you want to make that kind of judgment, but you're solving a different problem there. You're solving a different problem. And then you're making a trade-off between, how important is that problem versus how important is the problem of people just, having a regular income so they can buy stuff. So the next one here is the earned income tax credit. So let me share a quote from the earned income tax credit. Like a negative income tax, the EITC takes the form of a tax reduction for some and a payment of benefits by the tax administration for others. But the tax credit is not uniform, and it is a function of earnings only, that is, of labor income, not of total income. The EITC increases as earnings increase, and it remains constant over some range, and then it is gradually phased out. So unlike the negative income tax, where you start at zero, that's when you get the most benefit. With the EITC, if you start at zero, you get nothing from the EITC. You have to start actually earning money. It's an earned income tax credit. So you get paid to earn money. So they really want to get you out there into a job, is kind of the motivation behind this. So it's not going to help people who are jobless by choice or not. It's helping kind of low income workers. So it only pays you if you work. And unlike a basic income, it doesn't solve the problems caused by our use of the labor market as a tool for pushing money to consumers. In fact, it kind of subsidizes that, or leans into that approach of really tying people's income to their jobs, which is something that causes, of course, a lot of problems in our economy. If you've been talking about basic income with me at all ever. So here's another quote from that earned income tax credit section. The main difference between a basic income or a negative income tax and the EITC is obviously that the latter focuses exclusively on the working poor. This is no doubt why it enjoys a wider appeal than means-tested public assistance. The operation of such schemes, as Jennifer Sykes and her colleagues put it, shows that government programs aimed at assisting families do not need to be universal to avoid stigma as long as they are associated with behaviors most Americans condone, such as work. This key difference explains, for example, why the EITC has benefited from bipartisan support in the United States and seems to remain one of the least controversial components of the American welfare state. Yeah, so I think, politically, people want people to work. Everyone wants everyone else to be kind of pulling their own weight. And that has to do with incentives too, right? There's kind of this intuition that, people should only get what they earn and that kind of stuff. But if you have a culture around that, then that creates an incentive for people to go earn money. Where it's a problem is when we're kind of overusing that, not just the cultural incentives, but the monetary incentives as well. If we are overusing wages, if we're using wages as a way of pushing money to people, or we're withholding money from people in order to get them to go out and earn their money through wages, then you're not creating the jobs for the product of the labor anymore. So that's problematic. It distorts the labor market away from efficiency. EITC, obviously giving people money who need it is fine. It's solving a much smaller scale problem. It's solving like, oh, if people, aren't able to, get as much money as we want them to earn in the labor market, then we're kind of boosting them up a little bit. But it's not, it's not like answering the question of, oh, where does the economy's money come from? What's the source of consumer spending, and what's the normal way for people to get their money? It trusts that the labor market is the normal way to do that. So that's the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit. The next one is wage subsidies. So let me share a quote from this one. Basic income, the negative income tax, and the earned income tax credit can all be viewed as subsidizing work for which the pay is little, either because it is part-time or because it is not very productive in an immediate sense. This is what enables them all to address the unemployment trap and give more people access to jobs. But if making work pay is the real focus, why not go for what would seem to be a more straightforward strategy? Wage subsidies to low-paid workers are direct public contributions that either increase workers' pay or reduce its cost to their employers, or do both. So this is kind of like directly paying people to work instead of saying, oh, it's a tax credit you get, for working. It's like we're directly subsidizing wages. So again, we kind of have to ask this question: what is our goal? Is it to ensure that workers have sufficiently high income from jobs, or is it to efficiently provide consumers with money so they can buy stuff? And I would say that, different people have different goals. And I think some of the people who are proposing these kinds of plans, they're imagining a world in which everyone's a worker, or everyone has the opportunity to be a worker and the opportunity to contribute to society. But then as soon as you start providing that opportunity for them, it's not a contribution anymore. You're giving them something instead of them contributing, right? So obviously it can be a little bit of both, but it's not. We're trying all these different ways to get people to be workers and to reward people for being workers over and above what's actually necessary to get them to do the work. Right. If we only cared about what was necessary to get people to do the work, there'd be no such thing as minimum wage. But we're using wages for this other purpose, and we're using jobs for this other purpose. So that makes our labor market less efficient. So then, there was a comment in here. They're talking about the unemployment trap, which I think is just there are a few. I don't know specifically what they're referring to. I think there are, welfare cliffs that punish you for earning more money. So some of these schemes can kind of help with that if that's what your goal is. Obviously, forcing people to work makes the labor market less efficient, but also putting obstacles in the way of people being able to work, that makes the labor market less efficient as well. Somewhere early on in the book, they say, that basic income helps people who are sick from overwork, and it also helps people who are sick from not being able to find enough work, because it makes the whole market more smooth. People can kind of go in and out. There aren't as many kind of barriers to entry as a worker, or barriers to exit, right? So it's not necessarily the case that we need everyone to be working, but some people, maybe they could be contributing something amazing, and there are kind of bureaucratic obstacles that are standing in their way. So let's go to the next quote here. So the economist Edmund Phelps was a proponent of the wage subsidy. Why does Phelps restrict his scheme to full-time workers? Above all, because he wants to draw the unemployed into a life of full-time job holding and career building so they become self-supporting and have better chance of realizing their abilities. And why only the private sector? Because the purpose of the subsidies is to permit the broadest possible integration of disadvantaged workers into the business of society, which is the activity of the private sector. So this is, again, kind of this language that we come across again and again of identifying people as workers. Like, worker is your identity, and we need to be helping workers and supporting workers, helping workers be workers, that kind of thing. But it's really, his goals are different. His goals are different from the goals that I would have for basic income. And they're different for the goals that I would have for the labor market as well. I don't think there's much of a point to trying to get everyone, or as many people as possible, to be full-time workers. It's a life of full-time job holding and career building. Is that something we want to kind of incentivize for everyone? Is that a world we want to strive toward? I don't think so. Basic income, again, is for when you want to have a mechanism for distributing money to people, and what's that going to be? So even if you want this other stuff, if there's still room left over for more consumer spending or monetary tightening, so you're not overstimulating the financial sector, there's room for basic income, right? So I don't agree with the goals of a wage subsidy. Personally, but if you believe in a wage subsidy, or if you believe in any of these other plans and you want them to happen, just implementing these doesn't obviate the need for basic income, unless you've really kind of calibrated them so you allow monetary policy to tighten enough and rein in credit conditions and that kind of thing, which I don't think most people are imagining with these schemes. They're imagining like it's to bring people up to a subsistence level or something like that. And when you think about basic income in that way, you could use basic income for that, but you wouldn't be getting the most out of basic income. So we have a couple comments in the chat. So yeah, Chance says self-supporting. Yeah, why do we want people to be self-supporting? Why is that important? That's I like to say that self-sufficiency is inefficiency. We all, everybody's specializing, right? And the less work that any one person has to do, the better. The less work that we have to do as a society, the better. And we're all interdependent, right? It's okay, if someone wants to make a lot of money selling you something, you can buy that thing, and that's fine. That person is doing it because they want to, and then you get the thing because you wanted the thing that they were producing. It's totally fine. Yeah, go ahead, Bethany.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think one reason people like this idea is they associate it with not having to raise taxes on themselves or other risk on themselves. Like they associate a self-sufficient income being an income that isn't funded by taxes. Right. So I think that's part of what's behind this attraction to this idea, is that I don't have to give up more of my money to fund the person in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think they don't, they're not thinking about it like I am, where the government is kind of inducing all this money to be created, and then the question, and kind of pushing it to consumers. And the question is, well, do you want that to happen through an unstable financial sector, or do you want that to happen through government spending? And taxation isn't really a part of the picture. I mean, it can be, right? That can affect the level of basic income in the economy, but it's not like taking from Peter to pay Paul or something like that. And it's not certainly any more that way than a wage subsidy would be. If the government is handing out jobs to people, that's still a handout that uses up resources, perhaps even more resources than if you were just giving them money, because now you're giving them money and wasting resources in the process of giving them the money. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a little different. The people are probably imagining anything like this, like a basic income or a wage subsidy coming out of taxes in some way. So I think that's kind of how they're thinking about it being funded. And then in terms of a wage subsidy, I guess what I don't think this explains why people would support a job guarantee. I think that's a little bit different. But my argument about not wanting to be taxed more might explain why they'd want a policy that's seen as transitionary and short term, and ultimately gets people into a job that doesn't require any taxes, that to pay to fund it, that kind of thing. They would want things that kind of phase out or look temporary, as opposed to something that is going to be longer term and perhaps funded by taxes longer term in their view.
Yeah, there's this idea that a properly functioning economy kind of goes on its own. Sometimes we need to use policies to kickstart it or stimulate it or something, and just get it going. And then once it's going and spinning, then everyone's fine or something like that. And I think that's not obviously not realistic. I think, if you look at what's actually happening in the world, the economy needs a constant stream of new money being issued into it. And the question is, what's the optimal pattern of distribution and mechanism of distribution and quantity of money being distributed? And that's really kind of the questions we need to be asking. I'm a little bit disappointed. Well, I can understand why they wrote this book the way they did, and they're kind of comparing it to these other things. But I think it's also pulling us into conversation. Obviously, I'm doing a podcast episode on it, so I can't be too mad about it. And I'm doing the same thing by addressing these topics. But these topics are not usually topics I bring up. I don't bring up, negative income tax or any of these alternatives when I'm talking about basic income, because I think it distracts from what the goal is. Excuse me. Go ahead, Eddie.
Yeah, I think it's important also to consider the divide. We were just talking about, workers versus non-workers. And I think it's sort of more important to consider asset owners versus non-asset owners. So if you think about the beginning of capitalism in maybe the 19th century or so, and you start building, things like factories, which bring up productivity. And that is the basis of increasing wealth in society today, that we can produce more because we have, productivity enhancing assets, which some people call capital. And the problem with that is that for whatever reason, the capital tends to get concentrated in the hands of a few. And so as a result, you end up where the few, big, capitalists, the capitalist class, if you will, have access to almost anything they could want. But then everybody else who does not own significant capital or assets, they are sort of left out of access to the economy. If everybody sort of were a capitalist, you wouldn't really have this problem. But for whatever reason, that's sort of not what we end up with.
So how does that factor into these various alternatives that we're discussing? Are you thinking about this as like, this is a separate goal for basic income, is to make everybody more like a capitalist because you're getting this kind of fixed income from the economy, that kind of thing?
Oh no, it was more of a sort of a coming off of what you were speaking of, and you often mentioned about talking about workers versus non-workers, like with the earned income tax, and this idea that you want to encourage work. But I think this is something that almost everybody misses, which is that the work in modern society is not the key thing. The key thing is actually the capital, the assets that produces the production, which actually underlies income. As opposed to just the money involved, which is flowing in that other direction. But it's the capital, it's the assets which are important. And the key problem is that, not everybody has that, despite it underlying most of the production of modern society. And so that's why you have to give people basic income, to give them access to the economy, even if they may not own assets.
Yeah, and in a way, you could say that basic income is a form of ownership of the productive assets of the economy, because it gives you a claim to those to the output of those assets. Yeah, I think that's right. And I like to say that the level of employment in the economy has very little to do with how much labor we need to produce everything. It has a lot to do with how much we want to employ people. Right, we want to employ people to give them money. But I think you're right that especially as technology advances, that production is coming more and more from capital. It's not coming from labor, but we're still employing people anyway, and we're just employing people less and less productively because we're doing it as a way to push them money. So that's the problem that basic income solves. You can frame it in terms of ownership of capital. You don't necessarily have to. You could just say, oh, we want, the economy is able to provide a certain amount of benefit, and we want people to be able to access that to the maximum extent possible, that kind of thing. But yeah,
I just think it's a little bit important to realize that is sort of the root cause of the situation, in my opinion.
The root cause of the situation. Yeah. I mean, I like to say that stuff like automation and technological advancement is calling attention to the fact that the way we get people their money has always been broken, right? Like, why is there such a thing as a job? There's such a thing as a job because sometimes there's something you want someone to do and they're not going to do it unless you pay them to do it. But we've kind of grafted this whole income distribution system onto the labor market. And yeah, certainly as we become less labor intensive and more capital intensive, it kind of highlights this problem that we're using this labor market in the wrong way. But I don't think it's a new problem, and I don't think the problem is caused by technological advancement or anything like that.
Well, I think to some degree, prior to capitalism, prior to the Industrial Revolution, you sort of wouldn't have the problem as much because you just didn't have that much production. Like, it wasn't really, it would not have been feasible prior to that happening for everyone to have very much at all, except maybe the very small, like the emperor and the kings and queens. So.
Yeah, a lot of it is like the scale of society and the scale of the economy. Certainly, if you're not in a world where money even makes sense, then basic income probably doesn't make sense either. So if you're in like a small scale context, or you're in kind of like a feudalistic society where you're just a serf and you're farming your land and giving some of your produce to the Lord or something. I don't know, like basic income makes sense in a large scale market economy. So once you're in that context, that's also the context where people specialize and, some people are producing way more than everyone else and, that kind of thing. And you need to have a mechanism for distributing that product. It's a context in which people are not self-sufficient. And if we tried to ask them to be self-sufficient or tried to make them self-sufficient, we'd be wasting a lot of resources. And that's the world that we live in. And it's the world that's appropriate for basic income, but we don't have a basic income.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's go to the next one. We're going to talk about guaranteed employment now. Guaranteed employment as an alternative to a guaranteed income for those able to work still has advocates today who say the government should not operate as a distributor of handouts to people in or out of work, but as an employer of last resort. Okay, but again, I think it's important to keep in mind here that the jobs themselves are a form of handout. Why not admit that the government is handing out benefits to the people and focus on doing it as efficiently as possible? I think some job guarantee advocates believe that the jobs will be productive, that, we're going to make sure the jobs are productive. We're hiring people to do useful things. We're matching up workers who want jobs with, tasks that need doing, and, like it's a matchmaking system or something like that. But really, at the end of the day, if you're creating the job for the benefit of the worker, then you're not creating it for the product of the labor. So it's, almost by definition, if you have a job guarantee, if you have guaranteed employment by the government, you are you're employing labor inefficiently. You're not getting the most bang for your labor buck because you're employing people when they otherwise would not be employed. Yeah. And then there's a comment in the YouTube live stream. As opposed to today, where you will own nothing and be happy. That was probably a response to something I said, but I don't remember what. So let's go to another quote about the job guarantee. Chance is highlighting jobs are handouts as a quote. That's a good one. I used to do, for a while, I was doing quotes on the Gresham account that would go out on Twitter, and I kind of fell off from that, but that's a good one. Here we go. If there is no other way of getting an income for the able-bodied unemployed, such a scheme, a job guarantee, amounts to a combination of forced hiring and forced labor. Given the costs of equipment, training, supervision, and litigation, the conscription of the least skilled and the least motivated would have every chance of resulting in negative net productivity. So yes, I agree with this 100%. There's a huge difference between creating a general incentive in the market for people to contribute needed labor and specifically forcing those who are least responsive to such incentives to go out and earn their money in a job. So this is a huge difference. And if you are thinking from a macroeconomic perspective, if we get the most out of our economy, that must mean, we're kind of getting the most out of our resources and employing everyone or that kind of thing. It feels intuitively right. But as soon as you start kind of targeting individual people, it can end up taking more resources than the product you get out of it. So there's really two trade-offs here that we need to pay attention to with the job guarantee. One is, or jobs in general, one is the person better off with leisure time or contributing their labor? Usually it's assumed in economics, and I think this is right, that the reason why you have to pay people to work is because they prefer leisure time, right? We can kind of assume that the worker is worse off if they have to work versus if they don't have to work. Leisure is preferred. You have to pay people to get them to go out and do something. And then the other trade-off is in terms of the product. Is anytime you're employing people, not just in a job guarantee, but anytime you're employing people, you can ask the question, are we going to get more production out of employing this person versus letting this person, do whatever they would have wanted to do with their time? And we call it leisure, but that doesn't mean it's not productive, right? Like most of the important work that people do in our society is not paid, or a lot of it anyway. So labor market is important for when you want to get people to do something different, but we don't want to kind of force everyone into the labor market. That's, the labor market is for a specific thing. So basic income allows us to not to have to do that. It allows us not to have to force people to earn their money in the labor market to the extent that we don't need them to, right? Obviously, if we need more people to be working in the labor market, then maybe a lower basic income is appropriate or something like that. So let's share the next quote here. Once generalized beyond the cherry picking of the most employable, the practice of forcing people to work for their income is expensive. If such an obligation can be justified, it should certainly not be out of a concern for cost containment, unless the jobs on offer are made so unattractive that some people will prefer to starve or beg than take them, with savings then resulting from a low rate of take up. So this is kind of a little bit tongue in cheek. Make the job guarantee jobs really bad so nobody signs up for them, so you don't have to put resources into employing people. I thought that was funny. And then this is another good one here. Oops. Okay. Guaranteeing to all the real possibility of access to paid work is an important objective indeed, one that is central to our plea for an unconditional basic income. So this is interesting. Is this really an important objective in our economy at all, let alone central to the plea of unconditional basic income? The real possibility of access to paid work. Why is that important? You're paying people to compensate them for, having to go do this work. That's the whole point of paid work. So I'm not on board with this idea that basic income is supposed to help with unemployment or give people access to paid employment or something like that. That feels off to me. The labor market, like I said, is only for when we want to pay people to spend their time doing something different. So I think, giving people access to paid work, I think there's a case to be made for giving people access to meaningful activities that benefit them. And maybe some of those activities are things that they actually pay for, right? You want to play soccer in your soccer league or something like that. That makes sense. You're providing a service and people are paying for the service. Providing a service of giving people money in exchange for having them work, it's just, you can have a higher basic income and then they don't need to go do that work anyway. So you only want to force people to work to the extent that you actually benefit from the product of the labor and it's worth the trade-offs. So we're on to our last basic income alternative, which is working time reduction. So reducing the number of hours that people work, or mandating the reduction of hours that people work. So Joan says in the chat, access to paid work sounds like a misguided egalitarian notion. Everyone should have equal access to it, no matter that it's unneeded or unwanted. Yeah, I think that's an important point. You know, some people are useful workers and some people aren't. You want to hire the people who are going to do the best work, and you don't want to hire everyone else, you know, or the best, you know, kind of cost benefit trade-off, right? And that's fine. You care about people. Ultimately, you care about people. You care about everyone, and you want everyone to benefit as consumers from the economy. That's not about employing everyone. It's about employing the people who, when those people are employed, they benefit everyone the most. So that's really, you know, kind of, I don't feel like the workplace is the place for kind of this kind of egalitarian stuff. It's more on the consumer end of things. So let's talk about working time reduction. So I can imagine that you guys all know some of the things that I'm going to say about this. If there is no other way of getting an income for the able-bodied unemployed, such a scheme amounts to a I just did this one. All right. Suppose that there is far from enough work for all those who would like to work, and that faith in growth as the solution has, for whatever reason, been given up. It is then tempting to advocate reducing significantly the working hours of those who work full-time or more, and redistribute these hours among the unemployed. There have been a long string of proposals of this sort, ranging from a 1977 call by a French collective called Adre for working just 2 hours a day, to a 2010 argument for a 21-hour work week by the New Economics Foundation. Note that there is only a superficial continuity between these proposals and the old fight for the shortening of the working day and of the working week, as eloquently described by, among others, Karl Marx. The central motivation of the struggle is no longer to reduce a burden having to work more, but to share a privilege, the privilege of getting to work more, of getting to work more hours. So that's an interesting contrast. And then the question is, you know, it really feels like you're really trying to shoehorn this, you know, getting money to people thing into jobs, and you're kind of, you know, obviously, if you're forcing people to work less, that adds inefficiency into the labor market. You know, if I wanted 2 workers to work, you know, half the time, then I would have done that. There's a reason why I hired the one guy to work full time and not the 2 workers to work half time, because it's more efficient that way. So yeah, go ahead, Bethany.
Yeah, I was just going to say that also, like, if you can afford in your economy for people to have a certain amount of money, then then this doesn't really change that amount, right? To like distribute the hours or not doesn't change the amount of money you can afford for people to have. So it's kind of like a strange way of doing it.
Yeah, and it might, you know, help a little bit with some distributional stuff in the macroeconomy, but it's not going to solve the macroeconomic problem of how to get enough money flowing into the economy to kind of keep it going if all you're doing is just redistributing income from one person to another. It doesn't really, you know, maybe it'll cause deflation, or maybe it'll force you to kind of stimulate the financial sector to keep the price level stable or something like that. But it's not, you know, it doesn't answer this question of where does the economy's money come from, which basic income really does. And again, you know, the question is, why is there such a thing as a job? Because there's work that we want done that nobody will do unless you pay them. And then you can ask the question, why does it matter how much people are paid or how much they're working, as long as they have enough incentive to do the thing? We just want them to do the thing. That's the whole point. So basic income is often compared to labor market reforms like shorter working hours or higher minimum wage or guaranteed jobs. And it's true that basic income also changes the structure of the labor market. Of course it does, but that's because it takes over a task that the labor market was improperly assigned in the first place. These other schemes are doubling down on the idea that jobs are supposed to be how you get your money. They're not. Wages, just an incentive to work. No reason why they should be people's general source of income, and putting limits on working hours or wages just gets in the way of efficient labor allocation and distribution. So let's go to another quote here. Yeah, and Joan says the sharing of a privilege to work is similar to the previous notion of giving everyone equal access to a job, as if it's even desired by all. And if it is desired by all, you have to ask, well, what's causing that to happen? Why does everyone need a job? What's creating those conditions? If we don't need everyone to work, but everyone needs a job, then are we doing something wrong in our economic policy? And yes, the answer is yes. We don't have a high enough basic income. That's what causes that. So here's the next one. Making good progress here. Given that the right to a basic income is not subjected to the condition of being involuntarily unemployed, workers can give up their jobs without ceasing to be entitled to their unconditional basic income, so as opposed to the earned income tax credit. And given that the level of basic income component of a household's income remains unaffected when its members decide to reduce their working time, the cost of them doing so is reduced and their propensity to do so is accordingly increased. The employment capacity thereby freed up by current incumbents, so people who are quitting their jobs, or quitting some of their working time, can be occupied by those currently unemployed, especially as basic income's universality enables the unemployed to start off with part-time jobs or to accept low pay for jobs with significant training components. So yeah, I mean, I think this is all about, they're framing it more in terms of like the freedom of the people just makes the people better off on their own. And that of course is true. But this freedom also increases efficiency of labor allocation. So you get people adjusting their prices, their wages and their quantities based on not on not on a threat of you're gonna starve if you don't have a job, and we're therefore forcing everyone to go out and earn a certain amount of money, but more like it's just kind of a natural general incentive. Different people are going to respond to it differently. Some people are going to work more, some people are going to work less, some people are going to earn more, some people are going to earn less, and all of that's fine. And even Eddie brought up capital owners. Some people are going to invest more and own more capital, and maybe that can be a problem if it gets too skewed or something like that. But getting a regular income unconditionally is as if you're owning, you have a share of ownership in the capital of all of society, because that gives you access to the product of the economy. So we can all be kind of shared owners of the economy through the basic income. And then to the extent that we need to provide an incentive for anyone to do anything different, to contribute labor, resources, anything, we can provide those people a bonus up and over above what the basic income people get. So that's it. We got through all of the quotes that I had prepared for today. So that's fantastic. I don't know, Bethany, do you have any, or I guess you're probably busy. I don't know. I think, this chapter, it's a nice survey of the things that people like to compare basic income to, but it still feels to me like it's mired in this, kind of worker-oriented economy. How are you, how are you providing people freedom, that kind of thing? And these are all kind of, it feels like it's around the edges. And the core thing of basic income is just, okay, you need a money distribution mechanism. And the way we get people their money now is broken. It's not just distorting the labor market away from efficiency, but it's distorting the financial sector away from efficiency, and it causes recessions, right? It causes, you didn't have a financial sector meltdown like 2008 or even like 1929. You didn't have that when everyone was producing stuff for themselves, right? When people were self-sufficient in small tribes or something, maybe a storm would hit and kill you or something, but you wouldn't have, like what's up with these kind of recessions that are caused purely by issues in the financial sector when you still have the productive capacity that you always had. So, I mean, I think this is the core of what basic income is. This is the core of the problem that basic income addresses, is that it's a simple and stable and direct way of getting money to consumers so they can access the economy's output, as opposed to kind of the unstable monetary stimulus that we use to ease credit conditions, make it easier to borrow, get businesses to hire people, and doing it for a reason other, just to kind of prop up consumer demand and stimulate the economy and stuff like that. The economy doesn't need stimulating. People need access to the economy's potential. And that may stimulate the economy. It'll cause it to do more, sure. But the goal isn't to stimulate the economy. The goal is to get the benefit out of the economy, to get the product out of the economy. And the simplest way to do that is to give people money, which are the tickets that they can use to claim that output. So certainly, if you're not doing this properly, there are detrimental effects to people's freedom. And there's, people get left behind in poverty and all of that. Basic income is not about any of those things. It's not about poverty. It's not about freedom. It's not about automation. It's not about any of that stuff. It's just about efficient distribution of money to consumers. So that's it. This was a fun discussion. Next week, we're talking about chapter 3. Let me find it here. Chapter 3 is prehistory, public assistance and social insurance. So we're going to go more down the kind of safety net frame of basic income. And I'm sure I will be critical of some of that discussion as well. So thanks everyone for coming. This was a fun chat. Let me stop the